Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, I guess I should say. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I appreciate you watching. Thank you for joining me today. So today we're talking about design research. Last week we sort of introduced some concepts. We started talking about user experience design, what that's all about, right? I had to do the pre-recorded video last week, but all the topics are still there, all the things that I would have covered anyway. You might have even gotten a little more from what I put out last week than I would have done in a live session. So we said, we kind of have these sort of core concepts that we've kind of been working around now. We have this sort of functional idea or a functional definition of design. Design is about solving problems within constraints, right? So as we're thinking about design, we're thinking about problems and solutions. And so it sort of gets us to this idea that, kind of as we mentioned last week, there is a bit of magic going on. But if we think about that in terms of, stage magicians, that magic isn't real, it's an illusion. And so if magic isn't real, if there's just an environment in which magic can happen, right, that an illusion can take place that can cause, joy, wonder, aka a good experience, then that means that it's possible for us as designers to create or design an experience for other people to have that would make the interaction a good interaction, that would give the users a good experience. And so what we're talking about today is design research. Right? As we're talking about research, we're essentially talking about being deterministic of our problem and then figuring out how to solve the problem in such a way that the good user experience is happening. Right? And so in order to do that, we have to research, we have to look at things. And please note that when I'm saying research here, I'm not talking about, maybe what you're looking at here with this individual in a library, pulling out a book and looking at, what's in a book. But I'm talking about looking at real data that you might get from a website or you might get from people to actually make determinations. And so, one of the things that we'll talk about a lot is that, as we're designing, really all we're doing is a lot of well-informed decision-making. And that well-informed decision-making is going toward a certain end. It's going toward solving that problem. So we have to look at things that exist. We have to be deterministic of the problem and figure things out. And then we can actually start working to solve that problem and get from our problem state to our goal state. So why do we research? Why do we research? Why do we worry about this stuff at all? Right? We've said that research is based around data, and data is, something that is a hard collection of numbers, of informative bits of, let's just say it's hard information that helps us to make informed decisions. right? Because without that, without this hard information that helps us make informed decisions, well, all we have are our assumptions. And we can sort of think about this in relation to, our regular life when we're going throughout problems in our particular day. Right? Whenever we're facing a new problem, we face it with our own preconceived notions. We face it with our own assumptions. And we like to think that the way that we understand a problem or our assumptions about a problem and how this problem exists in the real world, well, we like to think they're pretty close. We like to think they're pretty close. Like, we might not fully understand a problem, but, we might have a good idea of what's going on. And so we're not that far away from the problem in the actual world. And this is the way that we approach a lot of things. Right? Because we always think that, we know what's going on. Especially if you're close to a situation. If you've had experience doing something. An experience in and of itself could be a form of research, right? You have anecdotal knowledge of things that have happened in the past, and you can use those anecdotes to potentially craft research and work in a certain direction. But your understanding of a problem or how you assume a problem to be is most likely not the way it actually is. Right? When we look at the relationship between our assumptions and the actual world in our own minds, but in reality, they're pretty far apart. They're pretty far apart. Right? And the only thing that bridges our assumptions and the actual world without research is just wishful thinking. It's the way we want things to work. Right? The gap between our assumptions and the actual world, this chasm, is just bridged with wishful thinking. Because that's the only thing that we have backing our assumptions related to a problem, if we don't research. Right, I don't know about you, but I would like to have my informed decision-making processes done or backed with something just a little bit stronger than wishful thinking, than hopes and dreams. Right, Nick Remus said, the work that uncovers and articulates the needs of individuals and or groups in order to inform the design of products and services in a structured manner. That's what research is. That is our functional definition of research. Is the work that Nick Remus once again called research the work that uncovers and articulates the needs of individuals and or groups in order to inform the design of products and services in a structured manner. So let's break this down. All right, let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at our functional definition here. Let's break this down. Let's talk about what this means. Right? So let's pull out some important parts here. The first thing that's important here is the work. Right? The work implies effort. We actually have to do something in this process. We have to go out and look at things. We have to ask questions. We have to figure things out. Right? This work is what replaces our wishful thinking. Right? Because it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to hope. I mean, maybe sometimes it does, but that's neither here nor there. It requires work. Like all good things, it requires work. And another big thing here that's important to us is that this work is going to uncover and articulate needs. Right? So we have a problem. Our wishful thinking, the way we think we understand a problem, might say one thing, but it's only through research that we can actually uncover what the actual root cause of the problem is, or even what the actual problem is. Right? Oftentimes when we are, getting into what we call design discovery, which is the process of design research, we like to call it discovery because of this uncovering nature. Right? It's more than just we're trying to figure out why this problem happens. Because part of the process is to try to figure out even if there is a problem. Your understanding of what causes something may be completely incorrect. Which is why one of the big things here that we're doing is we are uncovering needs, uncovering what the actual problem is. And then we're going to articulate the needs. And that's one of the big reasons why having the end user, right? And that's one of the things that I'm going to do that is I don't necessarily like doing it, but it's sort of the only terminology that we have. I mean, I guess we could say people, because one of the things that we said last time is that people use our websites. But you might hear me drop the word users in. Don't necessarily like using the word users. Right? It's said that there are two kind of people that talk about users: developers and drug dealers. So, what have you, although there can be some arguments made, and especially when we get later on in the semester and we start talking about things like dark patterns and things of that nature, we start talking about crafting designs in such a way that, impact people and the way they interact with something. I mean, there's some relationship there. But people use our websites, and we need people to be able to articulate the issues that they have with our websites in order for us to create a better experience for these people. These are the individuals, these are the groups. They have needs that are being met by our website. The needs that are being met by our website at its core are the problems that we need to solve. And so research in that sort of way, and that just kind of brings everything together in a little bow here. The research uncovers and gets to those needs so that we really understand the problems that we need to solve in order to create the environment. So that's why we use this as sort of our functional definition of design discovery or design research. So what do we know? What do we know? We don't know much. Right? One of the first things that we have to kind of realize is that the things that we know, of what we know, we don't know much. Right? I like putting this little cartoon here. I think this cartoon really sort of hammers home some of the points that I talked about in the previous slides. Right? Because we have the developer here in panel 1. The developer here, he has some assumptions. And the assumption here is that our users love sleeping on beds made of nails. So I'm assuming my user behavior, because I haven't gone out and asked anybody. I'm assuming my user behavior because I think my assumption, which is validated by my own worldview, is that they like sleeping on beds of nails. But then when we look here in panel 2, that's the person, that's the user. And they would probably rather be anywhere else except a bed of nails, but they definitely want to sleep in a nice big comfy bed. Right, we have these preconceived notions, we have these thoughts about our customers and our users, and they're oftentimes wrong. Because they're informed by our own worldviews, they're informed by our own what I call tribal knowledge, which is information that we have gained just from being a part of an industry for some period. Right? And tribal knowledge is actually something that instructors have a lot of trouble with. Right? And so we can kind of think about this sort of thing from that point of view. Your college instructors, myself included, right, have a lot of trouble with tribal knowledge from time to time. Think about being in a math class. And it's your first time taking a particular math class. You're learning these concepts for the very first time. Well, the instructor, they have their tribal knowledge, being a part of an organization or being part of a group for a long period of time, being a math person, a math teacher. They've taught these same concepts time and time and time again. So it becomes a second nature that they can teach these concepts, they can rattle them all off. And so if you forget the user, it's easy to let that tribal knowledge take over. It's easy to let your assumptions take over and be confused when your students aren't picking up on concepts very easily. Right? Because for you, these things might be like walking or breathing. Even because you do them several times every semester for the last 20 years. It's easy. But for somebody who's approaching it for the first time, for somebody who doesn't have that tribal knowledge, they find it to be incredibly difficult. And so it's that lack of a user-centric focus. It's that lack of a student-centric focus that causes those problems there. And I know I'm guilty of it myself. Right? Because I'll be like, I've been doing this a while. I've seen these things. I'm able to do these things. So like if I can do a program in 30 minutes, surely my students would be able to do a program in 3 or 4 hours. Doesn't always work out like that, right? New concepts, different things. So it's important that we go into things with that understanding. So what is the first thing we design? Well, the first thing that we design is the research. If we design good research and we go through a good discovery process, then things are going to be a whole lot easier for us down the road. Right? Because failure is an expensive way to learn, and some of you might have figured that out from being a college student. Right? Maybe you went through a class and didn't do all the things that you were supposed to do as a part of that class to, earn yourself a good grade. And maybe you failed. And overall, it's not a big deal, right? You take the class again, you try to do better, but it did cost some money. Failure is an expensive way to learn. Because you're going to be doubling your costs, basically, in fixing your mistakes or redoing things. And so if we don't have a good understanding of the real issues that people are having with our sites or with what we want to do, we might not just fail one time in trying to solve a problem, but we might fail multiple times. We might fail over and over and over again. And each time that costs more and more and more and more money. Right? Like there are ways to learn how to trade stocks, for example, right? Like just to try to bring this into something else that you might relate to. There are different ways that you can learn how to trade stocks, right? Like you can get a couple books and you can do the research and you can look at things and you can figure things out. Or you could just get some money and YOLO it into some stocks that you like, that you think might do well. And maybe you get lucky and get it right. But more likely you're going to get it wrong and you're going to lose a bunch of money. And then before long, you're just sending good money after bad, and you may as well just be burning it in a fire pit. Right? Design works the same way. So we want to make sure that we're understanding whether our problem is a wheel or a carousel. And this is where, like, if this was a seated class, I'd show you all the... this is in reference to a Mad Men clip. Right, and if you go on YouTube and you search Mad Men Carousel, you'd see the clip. I think it's a relatively famous clip, especially in design circles. But it's about Kodak. Eastman Kodak is the company that's going to the advertising agency that Don Draper works for. And they have this new slide projector, right? And some of you have no concept of a slide projector. Back in the day, you would take these pieces of film and they'd be sandwiched inside of cardboard, and you put that into a big device that would project light through the film, and it would put the picture on the wall. And that's the way that you would get pictures on the wall. It's basically the precursor to PowerPoint and digital projectors. Right, the Kodak company came in and they thought they had a great idea by calling it the wheel. But in doing their research and doing their due diligence, in finding out what the problem was and then crafting a story to fix the problem, they discovered that wheel doesn't grab anybody. A wheel is a thing used for utility. Right? But pictures, photos, memories, it's not about utility, it's about emotion. So if we want to sell a slide projector that puts photos on the wall, we don't want to sell it based on utility. We want to sell it based on emotion. And so it's not a wheel, it's a carousel. Because a carousel invokes feelings of youth, of childhood, of fun. Right? Being at the carnival or the park and riding the Ferris wheel. And it still goes around and around like a wheel would, right? Like a slide projector would. It still makes that same motion. But it connects better with the thoughts of what photos do for people, being memories and being things that we cherish. And it makes a better human connection. So if your problem is to sell a slide projector, you're selling it on the emotion, on the way that it makes people feel versus selling it on its utility. Right? Some other things that you might heard along these same lines are that you don't sell the steak, you sell the sizzle. Or you don't sell the mattress, you sell the good night's sleep. Right? That's what we're doing as we're designing this research, is that we're figuring out what that point is. What that point is, where if we go back a couple slides and look at our definition again, what the needs of our individuals are. So we're looking at finding that point where we are uncovering the needs of our people, of the people that use our sites, and we are connecting and designing the product in this case being our website, to meet those needs. To connect with the user to meet those needs. And so what I'm asking you to do in this class is to do a survey. Surveys happen oftentimes. If you were here a couple years ago when the college started the website redesign process here, you might have even gotten one of these surveys where the web design firm that we contracted to redesign the Cleveland Community College website, this is where they started as well. They started with a survey. That web design firm was called Modern Tribe. So you can kind of look them up if you'd like to. But they started with discovery. They started with research. And, they started by surveying. And they also did some focus grouping. And we'll talk about focus grouping as well. So let's talk about surveys for just a bit here. So as we're writing these surveys, what we're doing is we're wanting to do that thing where we inform the design of products and services, right? Remember that definition. We want to validate assumptions, but we want to be careful with that. And we say that we want to validate assumptions, and we want to reduce the cost of reaching success, right? Remember, failure is expensive. So I said we want to be careful when we're talking about validating assumptions. Because in general, we said our assumptions are worthless, right? We said our assumptions are just wishful thinking. So what's bringing us back to this assumption idea? Well, there's that chasm again. Our assumptions and the actual world. We said that wishful thinking is in this gap between our assumptions and the actual world. But some of our assumptions might not be assumptions. Some of our assumptions might be true. So we can't just take all of our assumptions for granted and say they're all just wishful thinking and we can just reject them wholesale. Just the same as we can't just say all of our assumptions are immediately correct. So in a way, when we are researching, we're kind of taking a lasso and we're throwing it out and we're hooking the actual world and we're pulling it in. So when we bring research into the situation, some of the assumptions are going to be proven, but most of the assumptions are probably still going to be false. So we're going to have this sort of Venn diagram where the actual world and our assumptions meet. And these are the things that we've validated with research. But we do want to be careful as not to inject bias into our survey. So with that being said, let's talk about surveying. It's inexpensive, and you can get a lot of people to do a survey pretty quickly, right? Like we're only doing, I think I'm asking you all to do a 10-question survey. Since you have Office 365 as a part of your college account, you can use Microsoft Forms. You can use Google Forms, which are all free to develop forms. And not only can you do this, but in doing this, you get some good information and it gives you analytics on the back end. So it'll help you find patterns and it'll help you take some of the data that you get and turn it into information without you actually having to put much thought into it. So that's really nice. And you have taken a survey before, right? I mean, I think pretty much everybody at some point in their lives, especially when you get a little older. I think maybe at least by the time you're 18, you've taken some kind of survey. But it's important for us to understand that surveying is a balancing act. Because oftentimes we see multiple different types of questions on a survey. We see closed-ended questions and we see open-ended questions. Closed-ended being like multiple choice. And so when we go into multiple choice questions, we have an understanding that, these closed-ended questions will give us good data, right? It'll give us concrete data because we have a limited set of things that can be chosen from. But what influences the closed-ended data? Well, one, bias, right? Because closed-ended data we have to generate our own multiple choice responses, or if we're using a Likert scale, 1 to 10, 1 to 5, we're still having to put some of our own assumptions into a question. So we get an answer, and we get an answer that we can quantify, but we don't necessarily get context. But on the flip side, if there are too many open-ended questions, you run the likelihood of frustrating the people that you're surveying. Right? Because having to write in a bunch of answers is tedious and tiresome. And there's also the possibility of getting off track. So if I can answer an open-ended question any way that I want to answer it, I can put data in there that's irrelevant or that tries to force a different thing. Right? And we saw that when we did the survey, right? We have the results of that survey. I wish I could share those with you all, but I think since some of it is personally identifiable information, I can't show all that to you, but maybe I can redact it a little bit and show you some of the responses in the future. But some people would write responses to open-ended questions that had absolutely nothing to do with the question at hand, right? Like, if I'm asking you questions about the website and you put in there something about, say, Blackboard, Right? Well, those two don't really have anything to do with one another. So your opinions on the way Blackboard works doesn't help me make good informed decisions about what I want to do with a website. So we want to be able to get context, but we don't want to be able to get so much context that it gives our users the sort of choice anxiety, or gives them the opportunity to go off the rails with some other information. And so ideally, we want to have a mix, right? And typically what I would say, like if I was doing a 10-question survey like I'm asking you all to do, I would do a mix of open-ended and closed-ended questions. My closed-ended questions would be a mix of multiple choice and Likert scale responses. And my open-ended questions would be just that. They'd be short response questions. And I'd probably do something like 7 and 3, 8 and 2. Right, so that way I could ask some questions and then have an open response question that would be somewhat similar to, say, the 3 to 5 questions before it, where I could get some context and tie the last couple of closed-ended questions together with some more information. I mean, if we do this in sort of a focus group scenario, then you could ask follow-up questions, which would get you your context. Right? But you don't necessarily get to do that with a survey. So there is that. Now, there are some problems with surveys. The biggest thing is the bias, right? People write them, we write them. So we need to be conscious of our assumptions as we go into writing a survey, because if our survey is already biased, then it won't actually uncover the problem, and it won't actually articulate the needs of our users. And there's also the need of finding a representational sample size. And for us in this course, I think that's especially important. Because as we're thinking about, surveying for the purposes of our own class assignments, well, we'd probably be lucky if we could find 6 people to do our surveys for us. Right? And so when you have a problem that you're trying to solve for a user base, for people that use a website, it's important that the group of people that you're asking these questions to, actually has this understanding of the real issues, that you have enough people there that, everything, that you can make sense of everything, and that it's actually connectable. Right? There are other methods that we could use. Focus grouping. So when we're focus grouping, we're getting people into a room and we're actually talking to them. Usability testing is where we're giving someone a finished product or a somewhat finished product, and we're asking them to use it and give their opinions on it. And so typically this would be done it would sort of be a combination thing, right? Like you'd have an existing website and you'd give a user some sort of heuristics. Do this heuristic evaluation, which we talk about heuristic evaluations later on in the course. Right? So we say something like, use this site and try to get a quote for car insurance or whatever the purpose of the site is. Use this site and try to do this thing. And then answer these questions, giving me your thoughts about how usable that was or was not. A/B testing, you're typically looking at 2 or more products side by side. I kind of relate this to the eye test, right? Better one, better two, better one, better two. If you've ever been to the eye doctor, that would make sense to you. But you get two or more, right? We typically try to limit it. Different products, and you're basically asked, which one do you like better? Why do you like that more than this other one? What are the features that make this one stand out? So on and so forth. Right, and the last one here is Service Safari. And Service Safari is more for a physical business, but you can also do it online, right? By looking at things like heat maps and search result logs and things of that nature. But a Service Safari is just where you'd go and you'd sit down in a business or what have you, and you'd just sit there and observe. And you'd make notes as you observed. It's a safari. You're kind of out in the wild and you're just observing things and you're writing down what you see. Right? So let's say, you go sit in a coffee shop and you watch the process that they engage in to take orders. And you see how it works and you see things that maybe could work better. Right? And so Service Safari is tougher to do in a web design context. But you can use things like heat maps. And so if I use something like a website heat map, and let's see if I can pull one up here, just so you all can kind of see what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a website heat map. Try to get a good one here. So if I look at a website heat map, I can sort of see like where people are going, where people are looking as they look at a site. So typically, you would develop heat maps in a controlled environment. You'd develop a heat map in, say, one of those usability testing sort of environments where you're having people come in and use the product. And this becomes part of your observation. So you can see, based on the hotter areas, right, the red areas, the orange areas, the yellow areas, these are the things that people are gravitating towards, and they're the things that people are looking at first. And so you see that the big things that people are looking at here is this big call to action text here, the logo, and then a little bit at the person here, because one of the things that we find in design theory is we find that faces make a connection with people. So if you look at a face, you're making a connection. One of the things that we talk about in the later modules, how we talk about relating to people, and one of the most relatable things is just the simple happy face, because it is a face that makes a connection, but it also is very simple, so you can project traits onto it. Right, and then to a lesser extent, we see the phone number here and the word easy gets some heat, which is interesting. Right, and so we can use, this is sort of this observational sort of thing that we can look at, we can make decisions off of. Another thing I mentioned is looking at search history. Right, that's one of the things that Modern Tribe as well did when they were looking at redesigning the Cleveland Community College website. Is they got the logs of the things that people would search for on the Cleveland Community College website. Because if people are searching for the same thing over and over and over and over again, then it must mean that that thing has some importance to it. And so we should do a better job at sort of highlighting it and making it more important on the site. And so that's how we can kind of do a service safari in an online environment. To some degree here, we'd want to ask ourselves the questions of, are any of these collection methods better? And the answer to that would be in some ways yes, and in some ways no. Right? Really, when we look at discovery and we look at design research, all of these methods have their own validity, they have their own place. Sometimes one's better than the other, sometimes it's flipped around. Right? So it's important for us to kind of think about when we would use what in what situation. And oftentimes we would use maybe a combination of each of these as the method of doing some research, as the method of doing some data collection. And so I do have more that I could talk about, right? Like we could look at the types of research, qualitative versus quantitative, generative versus evaluative, attitudinal versus behavioral. But I think we're going to just kind of come to some conclusions and a wrap up here. So the next thing that we do is we get started. And so this idea here of where we begin goes back to our functional definition of design. Or not design, our functional definition of research. Right? Let's throw that back up here. The work that uncovers and articulates the needs of individuals and or groups in order to inform the design of products and services in a structured manner. The word again there being needs. We're looking for the needs, we're articulating the needs. So we're not just discovering the needs, but we're actually determining what these needs are. And so these needs, when you need something, right? We can put it this way, when you need something, means you don't have it. Means you're lacking it. Means there's a problem. Right? If you don't have something that you need, there's a problem there. So when we're thinking about the idea of needs here, really it's the needs of our user, it's the needs of people, right? Because remember, people use our website. Their needs become our problems. So what are the needs of the people that use our website? How can we meet those needs? And so as we're looking for these unmet needs, we're uncovering the right problems to solve. And one of the things that I like to do in this class, since this is a theory class, I like to leave you all with things to think about. So, at the end of a lot of these, weekly class lectures, and I did it last week as well, right? If you remember that video. I like to leave you with something to think about. And so here's our last thing that I'm going to leave you with today as something to think about. You can optimize everything and still fail. Listen to that. You can optimize everything and still fail. Because you have to optimize for the right things. That's where reflection and qualitative approaches come in. Not just quantitative approaches, not just hard numbers, but qualitative approaches. finding those unmet needs. That's where reflection and qualitative approaches come in. By asking why, we can see the opportunity for something better beyond the bounds of the current best. I'm going to read that again because I think that statement in and of itself, right, we're applying it to design here because this is about design and design research specifically. But we could take this statement and apply it to so other things, right? So many other things. By asking why, we can see the opportunity for something better beyond the bounds of the current best. When we fully understand a problem, we have context to a problem. Then we can actually see where the opportunities are to make something better than anything that exists. But that involves a human connection, right? That involves context. That involves qualitative research, as opposed to just quantitative research, as opposed to just numbers, as opposed to just responses to a multiple choice question. Right? It goes back to that connection between the wheel and the carousel that we were talking about earlier. Right? Because quantitative approaches say wheel is round, wheel spins, this thing spins, this is wheel. But qualitative approaches get to emotion, uncover unmet needs, connect with people in a different way. Actually talking to people, actually asking them questions about the things that they use and why they like it and why they don't and what they need or what they would need to make things better. Gives us opportunities. We like to think about hard facts and hard data, numbers being the sort of be-all and end-all of understanding what's going on, but even math has its limits. And so that's where I'll leave you for today. Thank you once again for watching. If you have any questions, please send me an email or a Teams message. We'll answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.